4 years ago, the ABC and Screen Australia, taxpayer funded, said they were backing a new project, promoting the man behind what is in fact our biggest literary fraud, Professor Bruce Pascoe, the fake Aborigine who wrote a made-up history, the bestseller Dark Emu. And last night, 4 years on, we finally saw the results on the ABC. A film, The Dark Emu Story. I watched and wow, the ABC, you just cannot trust it at all. But there was one great thing about this film. No, it didn't actually admit that Pascoe isn't Aboriginal or show his genealogical records. 100% of ancestors actually of English descent. No, the opposite.
My name's Bruce Pascoe. I'm Ewan Bunurong, Tasmanian man.
Elders have said that they know who he is and they accept him as Aboriginal.
Yes, misinformation. In fact, 2 Aboriginal groups say Pascoe's a fake. That wasn't mentioned. Now, this film last night, well, it also refused to give examples of how Pascoe actually invented evidence for his bestseller, Dark Emu, to falsely claim Aborigines weren't mere hunter-gatherers, as he puts it, but farmers living in houses and towns of about 1,000 people. But what is so good is that this film did show, this is the good thing about it, exactly why so many Australians, particularly white ones, really want to believe this nonsense, that Pascoe is black and his book is true, that Aborigines weren't hunter-gatherers. They were farmers in towns. So why do so many people want to believe it? Well, it's the shame. Too many Pascoe fans seem embarrassed and ashamed that Aborigines were so technologically backward when whites first arrived. I mean, here are people supposedly here for 65,000 years. That's many years, thousands of years before the last Neanderthal actually disappeared in Europe. Yet in all that time, as empires rose and fell in Europe and around the world, they did not invent even the wheel or a written language. But Pascoe has come to the rescue. He actually denies that pre-colonial Aborigines were mere hunter-gatherers, as if being that was shameful. He absurdly insists instead they were farmers in those big towns, just like white people. They were even the world's first bakers. And the Dark Emu Story last night ran with more of the same. They weren't just the first astronomers, as one person in the film suggested. One rare fish trap of rocks in a river, or a few old branches leaning against each other. All this was enough to imagine all sorts of sophisticated technology.
For years, people saying Aboriginals were only hunters and gatherers, right? So our people, they designed the fish traps, which makes us architects. Our people built the fish traps, which makes us builders.
Genius engineering. I would describe the fish traps as the oldest human-made structure in the world. Older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than Stonehenge.
We have 2 standing gunnies across the creek, and these have been carbon dated to the 18th century. Now, that indicates that they're possibly the oldest standing houses in Australia.
Indigenous knowledge systems are now understood to be the equivalent of the Western knowledge system.
Seriously? The literature, the chemistry, the philosophy, the mathematics, the medicine, the physics, just the same. So obviously there's a desperation in this film to believe that Aborigines were better or more sophisticated than mere hunter-gatherers, who actually were incredibly skilled in their own way. And that's a desperation that Pascoe has exploited. And this film, The Dark Emu Story, made by the Aboriginal-led Blackfella Films, actually showed that brilliantly, why people want to believe this nonsense. Here are some of the people it interviewed testifying to Pascoe's appeal to the ashamed, testifying why his book has been so popular.
For a lot of white Australians, it also became an entry point into our society, and I think for them, an entry point into an Australia that is often inaccessible, and often quite scary, often one that they don't feel as if they understand or even belong in. To feel as if this can be their place too. That's what drew white Australians to this book.
White Australians might think Aboriginal people seem to be like us. They had agriculture, they had farms, they had fish traps. I can imagine that and I can identify with them.
And Aboriginal activists in this film, yes, they seem to buy this idea that Aborigines actually had to be farmers, not to be savages. Here's Marsha Langton, the key architect of Labor's voice to Parliament.
What it does, primarily, I believe, is shift the paradigm, the racist paradigm in Australia, from savage to fully fledged human being.
Yes, Pascoe, actually white, presents the kind of Aboriginal that a lot of white leftists feel most comfortable with. So maybe that's why the Dark Emu Story last night tried hard to keep this Pascoe myth alive. Back in 2019, Screen Australia, announcing this film, said it would actually, it'd be a series to promote Pascoe's theories, to actually promote them. It was telling us it's a chance to challenge the myth of pre-colonial Indigenous Australians being just hunter-gatherers. Just, that word again, just hunter-gatherers. Can't have that. But in the 4 years since then, the evidence that Pascoe isn't Aboriginal and his book isn't true became too overwhelming for the filmmakers and the ABC, even them, to ignore. The series is cut to just one film. Bruce Pascoe was dropped as a co-writer, and the allegations against him were, in fairness, they were mentioned in this film. But in a way in which every punch was pulled. For instance, Pascoe was asked for evidence for his most ludicrous claims. Where's the evidence that you're Aboriginal? Or why did you use false citations from diaries of early explorers like Charles Sturt? Now, it's true, the film showed Pascoe confronted by anthropologist Peter Sutton, who's a co-author of a book that destroys Pascoe's theory. But honestly, the heavily edited footage of their debate omitted any discussion of any example of Pascoe's fakery. And the closest we got to seeing Pascoe's dodgy techniques involved him rather fantasising instead of fabricating.
One of these sketches shows a line of women digging for yam daisy, or murnon. The fact that explorers and settlers report seeing such activity in so many different parts of the country is an indication that it wasn't an isolated technique. Cultivation was a feature of Aboriginal land use. The area the women were working is perfectly clear because they had made it so in order to most efficiently harvest their crop.
But to say that a picture of two women with digging sticks on a piece of grassland demonstrates agriculture or even horticulture is just pushing the evidence way beyond its capabilities. These are people who are extracting yam daisies in the most common sense interpretation of that picture. That picture's been reproduced over and over again as if there were no other evidence relevant to the story. So why have people picked on that? And why do they think it indicates cultivation of species using yam stock from last year? There's no evidence of that.
And that was it. And then the movie went on to show, branches pushed together or, whatever. To show that, stones in a river, to show that, yes, Pascoe's right, Aborigines were very sophisticated technology. Meanwhile, the film had Marsha Langton, The Voice, smearing Pascoe critics, notably me and Peter Sutton, who's actually of the left, like this.
And Bruce Pascoe's book ignited, the huddles of proto-fascists. So we have a resurgence of the culture wars.
That's your ABC screening so casually such defamation of me and others to protect the greatest literary fake we've ever known.